Yes, Anna, because I know you hate talking about the election, but we just got off the most important election of our lifetime, they told us. But the problem is that now we are into the next most important election of our lifetime, the twin special elections in Georgia, which will determine control of the Senate. And therefore, the fate of the universe hangs in the balance. So there isn't a moment to rest because remember, this is the most important election of our lifetime. You see, the thinking goes that unless Democrats retake control of the Senate, Mitch McConnell is going to block the entirety of Joe Biden's legislative agenda, just like he did to Barack Obama. But let's be honest, those Senate races in Georgia are going to be tough, and even if the Democrats somehow manage to pull it off, it would still mean that the balance of power would lie in Joe Manchin's hands, and he's basically indistinguishable from a Republican these days. So that means that the only real hope is that an administration can implement reforms that essentially bypass Congress. And thanks to the good work of people like David Dane at the American Prospect, some of those policy proposals are now at the forefront of the discourse. And the most talked about proposal involves student debt.
Well, Democratic senators are calling on the White House to cancel federal student loan debt. Senator Elizabeth Warren and Chuck Schumer are introducing a proposal calling on the cancellation of $50,000 in student loan debt for 43 million borrowers.
That's right. A Joe Biden administration could, in theory, cancel up to 95% of student debt. And even bum-ass Chuck Schumer is in favor of it. A reminder that the total student debt burden is currently $1.65 trillion. But yeah, as crazy as that sounds, it is possible to simply cancel it under existing law. According to Luke Hareen, a PhD student in law at Yale, I heard that's one of the good ones, it lies with an obscure statute dating back to the Eisenhower presidency known as Compromise and Settlement Authority. This authority was granted to the Department of Education first in 1958 and then codified further in the Higher Education Act of 1965. Compromise and settlement gives the Education Department this explicit authority, Hareen writes. ED has absolute discretion to determine when to stop collections, when to collect less than the full amount, and when to release debtors' claims in toto. So this has unleashed a wave of discourse. And this is one area where there are some disagreements on the left. Some people say that not so fast. Canceling student debt is not that redistributive at the end of the day. It really disproportionately affects professional managerial class types such as doctors and lawyers and the like. And there is some truth to that. If you look at student debt by income, the fourth and fifth highest quintile of earners have well over 50% of the total student debt burden. And this makes intuitive sense because the more degrees you have, the higher your income. But each degree is expensive. So if you went to med school or law school, you'll be making more money than if you got a bachelor's degree. But those degrees are more expensive, so you have a bigger debt burden. But if you look at data by wealth instead of income, a different picture emerges. The lowest quintile of wealth holds 55% of student debt. And again, this too makes sense. Wealth just means assets minus liabilities. So if you have a giant liability like student debt, well, then you have low wealth. So the opponents of debt cancellation say that this is just a windfall for people that are doing okay and not people who are truly poor. And that's true in a sense. I would prefer to tax billionaires at 100% and pass Medicare for all and give the poorest Americans a big fat check. That would be better. But those things, unfortunately, require Congress. And right now, the political conditions are not there to pass those kinds of things. But student debt cancellation is a reform that is available right now. And it would help people who are struggling. And not to sound like a right-winger, but it would also unleash human potential in a degree that we just can't really even imagine. You see, these days, the economy has been structured so that good degrees mean a good job and high income. And that is one of the pernicious aspects of student debt, is that it drives young people that may otherwise be doing good work that benefits society to more high-paid jobs like, say, investment banking or being a corporate lawyer for ExxonMobil that destroy society. It really has put a gun to a whole generation's head. I mean, take this high-paying but evil corporate job and get in line, or the debt will crush you. And the student debt crisis has gotten so large that it doesn't even just affect young people anymore.
I can't afford to retire. I could never make the payments.
Payments for student loans she took out for her son Andrew about a decade ago. She pays around $500 a month on the nearly $75,000 she owes on loans she took out and others she co-signed with her son. By her math, she'll probably be paying on her loans alone for another 11 years.
Even if I started drawing on my retirement and Social Security together, I still wouldn't have enough monthly to make those payments. It's certainly not where I hope to be at this stage in life.
The number of Americans age 60 and older with student loan debt quadrupled between 2005 and 2015 to nearly 3 million. And the average amount they owe has nearly doubled from about $12,000 to almost $24,000.
Well, if you guys can hear me okay, thanks in large part to Joe Biden, who, despite his protestations, wrote the bankruptcy bill of 2005. Student debt cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. It's one of the only forms of debt that cannot be discharged in bankruptcy, which means that if you default on your payments, you can get your wages garnished. And studies show that about 1 in 4 borrowers default on their student loans. And what's even more sinister is that the government can even garnish your Social Security.
Retired and disabled Americans with outstanding student debt are increasingly seeing their Social Security checks garnished by the federal government in an attempt to recover millions in unpaid student loans. And this is leaving thousands of people over the age of 50 with below poverty incomes, according to a new report out Tuesday.
And beyond the relief that it would provide to people in terms of their balance sheets, the Biden administration will need to find some way to inject some economic stimulus into the economy that is still basically on life support because of the pandemic. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm skeptical that Mitch McConnell would help Joe Biden pass a big stimulus package in the Senate. And as Zach Carter points out, the median student loan payment is $222 a month. That's 45 million people with an extra $222 to spend every month. So that means it would be economically stimulating. But beyond that, a grand sweeping move like canceling over $1 trillion worth of debt is the kind of thing that the government just hasn't done in a very long time. It's the kind of simple, understandable thing that politicians can run on. Most Americans have more or less accepted that the government is unwilling or unable to do anything really meaningful to help their lot in life. A giant student debt jubilee could help raise people's expectations. Of course, canceling the current student debt does nothing to fix the problems with higher education, especially the ever-spiraling costs. But that's as much an argument against canceling student debt as Hillary Clinton's famous line that breaking up the banks won't end racism. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And it may create the political terrain for further reforms. Student debt kind of crept up on us in the mid-aughts. It was like a new thing at the time, really. But I suspect that with a big, splashy jubilee, people will not tolerate it again in the 2020s. Now, even though the Joe Biden administration can cancel student debt, it doesn't mean it will. Biden's instincts will be to cut a deal with Congress. He evidently believes that he can work with his former colleague, Mitch McConnell. And according to NPR, Biden is calling for exactly that. In answer to a question at a Monday press conference, Biden repeated his support for a provision passed as part of the HEROES Act, which the Democratic-controlled House updated on October 1st. The provision calls for the federal government to pay off up to $10,000 in private, non-federal student loans for economically distressed borrowers. So, in other words, a mean-tested, half-measure gobbledygook that is just peak Democrat brain. The Democrats, of course, will like nothing more than to use McConnell and an intransigent Congress as an excuse for not doing anything. But the presidency has broad powers. They can do a lot. From ending the war in Yemen to using the Postal Service as a public bank, the left should agitate for the executive to do as much as it can, including wiping out over $1 trillion in student debt.
The means testing and the tiny amount that Biden would be willing to forgive is just, it's such a slap in the face. And what I don't understand is what's stopping him? What's stopping Democratic lawmakers from pursuing a policy that would be deeply popular? I mean, this impacts so many people. And it negatively impacts our economic situation, as you perfectly described. So I don't understand.
Well, You know, I mean,
is it the interest that the federal government is making on these loans? Like, is that what it is? Like, why don't they just forgive it?
Yeah, I don't. It's not that. It's not like student debt. Like, 'cause student debt is held by the government, the vast majority of it. It's not like there's like some bank, that is making. You know what I mean? I mean, there is tons of corporations that are making money off of student debt, like the people who like service these loans, and I was like, there are some corporate interests behind it, although the actual debt is held by the government. But I mean, it's just beyond the sort of corruption, the naked corruption that exists within the Democratic Party. Beyond that, there is also something deeper going on with them, in which they've just interiorized so much of this ideology of means testing, half measures, using the market to fix problems. Like there is kind of, as well as like a sort of a naked corruption, there is an ideological core to a lot of these people. They do really believe all this stuff. And Biden himself, like just from a temperament standpoint, just isn't gonna rock the boat. Like he's never been that kind of guy, and going around Congress. I mean, like not really going around them, but like doing something big without Congress. Just from a temperament standpoint, it's just something that his instincts, everything in his body will be telling him that it's wrong. It's wrong to do it. Especially for someone who was in the Senate for so long, which is just kind of this weird buddy club. I mean, people don't understand like the workings, the interior workings of the Senate are very strange, and there's this kind of like weird collegial thing going on. It's very bizarre, and so like that's
super counterproductive.
Biden. Yeah, I mean it's absurd. I mean it's absurd given like the facts on the ground, and given like the way McConnell has transformed the Senate in his leadership. So yeah, I don't know.
Well, one other thing.
My breath.
No, I mean, I'm obviously not either. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't keep fighting. And I've noticed, I don't know, one of the reasons why Schumer seems to be more supportive of, policies like canceling student loan debt or, FDR style economic policies is because he's terrified that he's going to be primaried by AOC. Oh, yeah. And so AOC has been like a stone in his shoe and in the, moderate Democrat shoes for a while. But I feel like, and I don't know how long it's going to last. I hope for a while, or I hope it's permanent. But following the election, I mean, it took half a day for Democrats to immediately turn around and start like trash talking progressives like AOC. And she hit back, and she continues to hit back. And and it's not just her. For instance, Biden has already named some pretty terrible people with close ties to the fossil fuel industry into his cabinet. And in response to that, you have people like Cori Bush showing up to the DNC headquarters to protest, right? And so I want more of that. I want them to hold these politicians accountable as much as they possibly can. But it's just amazing how Democrats still don't get it. Like they completely abandon Americans on various issues, whether it's student loan debt, increasing the minimum wage, all of the issues that actually matter to people, issues that would make them like wildly popular with the electorate. They just abandon those issues, abandon the American people, and then they turn around and blame like slogans for political movements. Like, grow up.
I mean, listen, Jamel Bowie had an article in the New York Times this week where he basically talked about, all the sort of post-election takes about why Republicans did surprisingly well, why Trump did surprisingly well, given all the evidence that was being told to us that he was just going to be super weak, and it's just like it's the stimulus. It's like he put checks in people's hands. This was a huge poverty reduction program. Like at the end of the day, the CARES Act did do that. The $600 in unemployment insurance a month plus a $1,200 check with his name on it, did affect people's bottom line. And that probably had a very, very meaningful effect on the election. Just like Janet Yellen increasing rate hikes, increasing the interest rates at the Fed right before the 2016 election, maybe had an effect on getting Trump elected. So, these kind of big economic things, like 45 million people who have student debt if just the Democrats would to do that and just get it, okay, it's gone, and then just be like, remember that? I did that for you. You know, like that's how you win elections. You put money in people's pocket, you help them the bottom line, and then you keep on reminding them forever and ever and ever. It's how Obama won the 2012 election, when he reminded people in the Rust Belt that he saved the auto industry, which he did. You know, like,
Yeah.
I mean, we would have done it differently. Maybe we should have nationalized GM or something, but he did save those jobs that would have been wiped out overnight. And he ran on that and he won. So it's just, you know, the Democrats just, they don't do that stuff anymore. They just don't do it. They don't do it, and it's because it's a combination of ideology and material interests, and those two things tend to have a funny habit of just kind of coinciding perfectly.